Please welcome to the stage John Simpkins, President and CEO of MDC, who will provide further context and lead our conversations on economic justice.
Good morning, good people. Thank you to Granville and the Freedom Singers for bringing a little bit of Sunday to Thursday. Thank you to the folks at the Kresge Foundation, especially the Human Services team, Dr. Hatter and her team, Caroline Altman-Smith, Rip Rapson, who've all been tremendous supporters of the work of MDC. MDC, a place where we work to enable people to live lives of meaning through work that brings dignity that's fully realized in community. Meaning, dignity, and community. MDC is who we are, and we're grateful for the support of the Kresge Foundation and for having me here today. Once again, another black man from South Carolina comes up to Detroit. And that connection between the South and the rest of the country, the connection between the South and here, between Stax and Motown, is precisely where we're going to spend some time this morning. We're going to talk about the South as a microcosm of what's happening around the country. So we'll look local, and then we'll go national. We'll have two panels, and before we do that, we're going to spend a little bit of time just giving you some context of what's going to inform this discussion. At MDC, we like to say we shape a South where all people thrive. We believe in a thriving South. We believe that people have access to the American dream, and the American dream has been summed up as a promise. It's a twofold promise, of prosperity and mobility. No matter where you are, you can move from that location to something better. And in the South, we see promise and mobility. In many ways, the South is thriving. Wealth is going up, corporations are moving in, people want to be there. People are even returning to the South. The great remigration, the great return is underway. The South is the fastest growing region in the country. My home state of South Carolina is the fastest growing state in the country, a sentence I never thought I would say. And if you take 6 states in the South, the Carolinas, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, and Texas, if you combine their contribution to GDP, total value of all goods and services produced in the country, it is greater than that of the entire Northeast Corridor from Washington, D.C. to Boston, Massachusetts. Yes, that includes New York City. The South is on fire. And yet, for 13 million people in the South, that promise is unkept. 1 in 6 Southerners live in poverty. Of those Southerners who live in poverty, it doesn't discriminate on the basis of race. 1 in 7 white Southerners living in poverty is still too many. 1 in 4 black Southerners living in poverty is unacceptable. 1 in 3 Southerners live below 200% of the poverty level. Working poor. People who are working, who have jobs, and still can't meet their basic needs. Poor people aren't lazy. Poor people work harder than anybody else. And the problem, the real problem, is that poor people in the South remain poor. What you see is not a map of poverty in the South. What you see is a map of intergenerational poverty. These are people who are children of people who are in poverty. That means if you are poor, you stay poor, and it is expensive to be poor. A child born into the bottom 20th percentile of the income distribution has almost no chance of getting to the top. And when we think about this in the context of the thriving that is occurring in the South, in cities like Charlotte, like Charleston, like Nashville, like Raleigh-Durham, we know that there's a yawning gap between the reality for some and the persistent persistent reality for others. The dropout rate for students with learning differences is 35%. And if you compare that to the national rate of 10%, the level of educational services that exists for students of color in the South is declining. And not only education, but debt. As I said, it's expensive to be poor, so you pay a premium. You pay a premium for credit. You pay a premium for food. And that means that you rack up debt. You live on credit. You live on credit cards. The wolf is always at the door. Title loans are your access to extra funds. Payday loans. 9 out of 10 of the states most burdened by credit card debt and penalties are in the South. So the question is, what do we do about this? How do we take an economic justice-centered approach to putting people at the heart of how we attack these problems, how we bridge that gap, how we invite everyone to the welcome table? We're going to spend a little bit of time this morning talking about that. And I'm going to be joined by a panel that I'll call up here in just a moment. But as we do that, I also want you to think about the role of philanthropy. Because as W.E.B. Du Bois said, as the South goes, so goes the nation. And when he said that about 100 years ago, as this foundation was being started, Julius Rosenwald was building 5,000 schools across the South. That investment, that people-centered investment, where communities put up half of the funds for those Rosenwald schools, paid off in increased educational outcomes for those individuals who are graduates of those schools, the ability to be not only economically mobile, but physically mobile. People who came to Detroit often came from Rosenwald schools. So as another great Southern philosopher said, the South got something to say. And we're about to hear it from various parts of the South, from various quarters of the South. What does it mean to have a seat at the welcome table? So please join me in welcoming to the stage Mauricio Calvo, Jesus Gerena, and Felipe Pinzon.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good to have all three of you with us. And Mauricio, I want to start with you and the work that you're doing with Latino Memphis. How are you working to empower and enable economic prosperity in Memphis?
Well, buenos dias, everyone. It's a great question. So it is really a multi-layer work. So the first thing that we're doing, you're talking about invisibility. We're trying to create awareness that we as a community exist. Oftentimes, we don't even make the charts. You know, you were talking about the growth in the South. The Latinx community is growing in the South fastest than anywhere else in the country. You know, in the last 10 years, the Latino community grew 43% in Memphis. Oftentimes people tell me, like, are there Latinos in Memphis? Like, yeah, they are, right? So that's one thing. And we have to create awareness, not only among other people, but even among ourselves, that we exist and we have a chance to be at the table. The second thing that we're doing, we're providing basic services that are fundamental for people to have a chance for prosperity. Legal services, workforce, and so on. And the third thing, just to be brief, is that we have to have partnerships with people like yourselves who are having the products and the services that our communities need access to. But you cannot even have access to a loan if you don't have a Social Security loan, a number, or if you don't have education or anything. So again, creating awareness, providing services, and partnering with cross-sector.
Thank you. Thank you. And Jesus, Uptogether is deeply involved in exactly that kind of work. And I don't want you to just talk about the work. I want to talk about what brought you to the work. What about your own personal experience informs what Uptogether does?
Thank you, John. Yeah, so I grew up I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, and it's funny, right? As you start painting this picture of what's happening in the South, historically, we've also have been experiencing in that island for quite some time, a direct result of colonialism. And my own personal experience in poverty awakened me, right, to when I moved to the United States, to being like, well, why do these conditions exist? Why is it that I moved to Western Massachusetts from a place of poverty to a place of affluence, and I have different opportunities and different choices for me and my family? And the trajectory is fundamentally changed out of that move. And I think for me, as I do the work of Uptogether, it's specifically that. It's positioning on understanding that our economic position is not dictated by the people, but by our systems.
Thank you. Felipe, you're in one of those places that's on fire economically, South Florida, Miami in particular. And yet, what do you see as the greatest structural challenge for achieving economic prosperity in a place like Miami or South Florida more broadly?
Thank you, John. Buenos dias, good morning. Felipe Pinzon with Hispanic Community of Florida. I could go over so many issues, and you guys are, if I'm not mistaken, very familiar with what's happening in the state of Florida, but I strongly believe that it still is income inequality. I guess the major structural issue. We can talk about climate change and housing, but I'd rather stick to income inequality as the defining challenge of all times. And to give you context for that conversation, for the per capita income for whites in the state of Florida is about $49,000. That number for African Americans and blacks is 26,000, and for Hispanics is 29,000. To even give you more context, the United Way Athlete report tells us that in South Florida, you need a family of four actually has to have an income of $80,000. And if you do quick math, that means that it's either one person, adult, earning $40 an hour, or two actually earning $20 each. That's not happening in the state of Florida. To make it even worse, the labor force participation of blacks and Hispanics is extremely high, higher than whites. It's still our communities, black and brown communities, are in entry-level jobs. I guess, John, to summarize, income inequality, and our job is to create access and opportunity and bring dignity to black and brown communities, and that's the work Hispanic community is doing.
Thank you, thank you. And Mauricio, just to follow up on what Felipe shared, in Memphis, when you're thinking about opportunities to build wealth in Hispanic Latinx communities, where are you seeing progress? Where are you seeing opportunities to do that?
I'm most helpful to see our youth.
Yeah.
So places like Memphis and the South, the migration, the Latino community is growing more by birth than by migration. So there is truly an opportunity because these kids are U.S. citizens. They are growing up learning the language, and so they're going to be able to integrate and be part of the community easier. So I'm hopeful that at least there's the willingness to work with us. I'm most concerned that there's a gap between, hey, I want to do something, but yet the opportunity just still doesn't exist. And again, sometimes it's because we're out of sight, out of mind, right? So if you think about CDFIs in Memphis, I don't think there's a single CDFI in Memphis that is specifically working for or with the Latinx community. Yeah. So people say, I want to do it, but they just don't have the resources or the people or somebody to actually do it.
What's the level of bank involvement by Hispanics and Latinx folks in Memphis?
Yeah, it's a community that is very much underbanked.
Yeah.
Because again, the structural barriers to often open a checking account, the mistrust and those things. So there are some places like Hope Credit Union and even the bigger banks that are trying, but it is a community that still relies on sending home whatever home they, or sending to money in a gas station or in a bodega or some kind of store, sending money, getting an exchange rate that is predatory. So, you were talking about, Memphis has more payday loan places than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. and legally in the state of Tennessee, you can charge 400% on a loan. So Latinos are utilizing more of those services, and again, than just traditional banking.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the issue of remittances, because as someone who used to work for USAID, which is the largest bilateral donor in the world, $24 billion budget, USAID isn't the largest donor in the world. Western Union sends more money abroad through remittances. So as we think about how much power people have by exercising their economic power, there's hope there.
Right, and we're sending money after we spend money here too, right?
Exactly.
And paying taxes here as well.
Yeah, yeah. And Jesus, where are you seeing opportunities for greater family economic security? Where are you seeing opportunities for people to move outside of the system that's based on either free labor or as free as we can get labor, not only in the South, but in the rest of the country?
Yeah, so we've done work across the country, and I would name 3 different cities. Our work here in Michigan through Detroit, our work in Austin, Texas, as well as in Boston, Massachusetts. And I think that the common trend is once you see the idea of direct investment, of the power of community, of a strength-based approach in general, of seeing people for their abilities rather than for their deficits, and putting money behind that, right? Showering them with that love. All of a sudden, right, like it is proven that it works, that people can do for themselves, that we don't always have to think about interventions or programs or services, that actually we should always start with them first. And so in all 3 areas, the idea is beginning to scale, right? Like whether it's in Massachusetts with the Department of Transitional Assistance, in Austin with the city council themselves, like they're thinking about, well, can we take this to a place where we can make it accessible to everyone, that they have enough, that the scarcity mentality is left, so that they can begin to pursue their goals and thrive. And I think in all those places you're beginning to see that, but I definitely think that we need a more collective understanding of what that initiative that exists that is being hampered by that scarcity mentality.
And how are the populations affected involved in developing these solutions?
Yeah, well, I think immediately is by investing in people, and once they get enough, right? Like I talk about it from a perspective of organizations, right? Like we're always trying to make our year-to-year budgets, right? And trying to propose and pay the bills and be innovative. And I love Michael McAfee's comments yesterday, right? Like 3% of unrestricted operating to getting to a point of abundance where you can begin to be creative and also impactful to your mission, right? And if you think about that from a household perspective, who is just trading one place to the other on how to make ends meet, and making sacrifices, right? And those trade-offs are impactful to them, and you eliminate that, then the individual's like, well, what can I do? And it's a rainbow of ideas that people come up with.
Thank you. Felipe, one of the other issues that came up yesterday was climate change, and Miami is at the epicenter of what we're seeing right now with the impact of climate change. I want you to look into your crystal ball and in a decade, think about what impact will climate change have on family economic success for people living in South Florida in the next 10 years or so?
I believe the impact will be very significant for working families in particular, right? As sea levels rising sea levels becomes a major issue in South Florida. More families are experiencing flooding, right? And this is not just during hurricane season, actually it's throughout the year. I don't know if you guys are aware, but in the last year or so, not during hurricane season, South Florida has experienced significant storms, creating many issues for working families. In fact, Hispanic community has made a huge investment in helping those families with home repairs. And I say that because it's becoming very expensive to live in South Florida for many reasons, but one of them is your ability to afford home repairs due to these climate change events. Hurricane season is, we are in hurricane season, and families are very scared of a major event. And the reason is the following, which is the one that actually bothers me the most. Always working families are the ones very impacted. During hurricanes, what happens is that people that are in entry-level jobs, earning minimum wage, they don't get to work. They don't get to earn a salary. And it becomes just even harder for them actually to live in South Florida. And as more immigrants and working families live South Florida, well, it becomes way more difficult for corporations and employers to actually find the workers they need, to do the jobs. So for sure, it's impacting the economy, but more than anything else, it's impacting working families and making it very difficult for them to stay in South Florida.
Thank you. And the thing about the climate is that it affects us all. It's not group specific. It's not sector specific. It's not confined to just one perspective. And thinking about how we can look more inclusively, especially building on Michael McAfee's comments yesterday. Mauricio, I want to know, what do you see, if anything, that's being done in Memphis to build economic solidarity across groups?
So Dr. Harder and I always talk about solidarity, and I'm so proud to be Mexican, American, and Memphian, right? You think about, and after hearing the Freedom Choir and Justin, so Memphis has a lot of good things, very resilient. I've been there for 30 years, so I speak ESL, English as a Southern language. So, so the Memphian is very willing, and we are, there's a desire to help each other. But there's still something missing. We have to push through. The reality is that the alliance between black, brown, and white needs to happen. And again, I think the willingness is there. We're just missing the know-how and just kind of push through. So I see a lot of great initiatives. I see some places where we're making the mark, but there's so many other things that we're completely missing the table. We don't have a single elected official in Memphis that is Latino. We have 200 public schools, and we have 2 principals that are Latinx. So we have to do more. There has to be more intentionality on making this happen. I invite all of you to look around the table. I mean, if we represent 20% of the population, where is the 20% of the population that is Latino, Latina in this room, in your boardroom, in your employees? So there you are, right? Exactly. It's right here, right? But we need to do better. We need to start by having people who sound like us and look like us on your tables. And I think that's going to make some changes.
Thank you. Thank you. Final comment. I'll throw up a jump ball for anybody who wants to jump in. What do you want to leave people with?
I'll start with just saying, and Mauricio, we started talking about this work of how do we find more individuals to bring to those tables to have a more common conversation, and have been working as a group under this concept of Unidos, and are trying to grow that table. So there's that piece of how are we being proactively seeking to be able to change these conditions and helping others be able to understand, and are really happy to be able to work with Kresge on that. In addition to it, and thinking about the South, is how are we seeing these ideas, right? Yeah. How are we demonstrating them? How are we shifting? And I like, not to get too ahead of ourselves, but like going back to this love and power, how are we putting that love and power back? And going back to activating people, what I know is that once they don't have to think about that scarcity, they also want to act. Mm-hmm. And so there's a really positive impact that occurs as a result of engagement, of recognition, of investment, and I feel that we're just beginning to see it and think about how that can happen.
There's untapped capability that we haven't really taken advantage of. Yeah.
Along those lines, for me, is giving immigrants and others, dignity, great access and opportunity. For sure, and our job is to put toward people to work, in jobs that actually pay better, and so much work is being done in that space. Last but not least, over the next many years, I think that our job as immigrants is to change the narrative about immigrant families in the United States. Well, you heard the debate 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
So much of that is happening in many communities, and it's very strong in very particular communities, including Florida, of course. We are contributing to this society. If you take something away from this conversation is we are contributing to this society. We're moving the economy. We are hardworking people, and we continue to do great things to this country. We're not taking the jobs away from anyone. We are creating jobs. Hispanics are business owners across the nation. You have to help us out, telling others that this is the reality, that is not the one that actually others are trying to make us believe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe it's hard to tap that, but truly, go back to your places and think about what is my Latinx strategy. We're not asking you to reinvent the wheel. We cannot do everything. Think about who can I partner with to advance our mission with the Latinx community. And I guarantee you're just a couple of degrees of separation. You're almost there, but it's going to require some intentionality, and it's going to require some work. We have to change the narrative, but there has to be, we actually have to do it. So yeah, go back and ask yourself that question. That would be my call to action.
All ways to get back to the welcome table. Thank you, and please join me in thanking these 3 extraordinary gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauricio Calvo, Jesus Gerena, and Felipe Pinzon.